I speak to you today not as a distant leader, but as a human being who has learned slowly and sometimes painfully that life is far more fragile than power, titles, or uniforms. My name is Ibrahim Traoré. I am the president of Burkina Faso, but before that, and deep beneath that title, I am simply a human being searching for meaning, truth, and direction in a world that often moves too fast to allow reflection. I have always been a curious person. I ask questions, I read, I listen. When I began walking the path of Christianity, I did not do so for appearances, tradition, or politics. I did not view faith as something abstract or ceremonial. I saw it as a discipline of learning, a way to slow the heartbeat, a way to examine one's conscience in silence. I wanted to understand the Word of God, to reflect deeply on the life of Jesus, and to grasp what it truly means to live with humility, restraint, and compassion. That is why I formed a simple habit. I began carrying a small Bible with me, not as a symbol, not as a shield, just as a reminder. I read it when time allowed. I kept it close when the world became loud. It became part of my daily rhythm, like breathing or walking. I never imagined it would become anything more than that. In February of 2026, the people of Burkina Faso gathered in Ouagadougou for a national march. It was a day of unity, a day of pride, a day when joy moved freely through the streets. I chose to join them not as a commander, not as a guarded figure behind barriers, but as one among them. I wore no uniform, no armor, no visible protection. I walked openly, surrounded by the people, feeling what it meant to belong to my people rather than stand above them. I remember the sound of voices, the heat of the air, the closeness of bodies moving together toward a shared purpose. I remember feeling at peace. Then, in a single moment, everything changed. What happened next forced me to confront questions about faith, destiny, and responsibility in ways I had never imagined. It tested what I believed about the presence of God, about human fragility, and about why some lives continue while others do not. This is not a story about politics. This is not a sermon. This is a testimony, and I share it with Muslims, Christians, leaders of the Sahel, and people across the world because what I experienced does not belong to me alone. The march was loud, but it was not chaotic. It had a rhythm, drums somewhere behind me, voices rising and falling like waves. I remember thinking how rare it is for a nation to breathe in unison, even for a few hours. That thought stayed with me because it was the last calm thought I had before everything broke apart. I did not see the man at first. No one did. That is the danger of crowds. They hide intentions as easily as they hide fear. One second I was walking, smiling at an elderly woman who raised her hand to bless me. The next second, there was a force against my chest so sharp and sudden that my mind could not immediately name it as pain. It felt like being punched by the world itself. There was no warning, no shouted words, no dramatic struggle, just impact. A blunt, burning pressure directly over my heart. I remember taking a breath that did not fully arrive. My body reacted before my mind understood. My legs weakened, my vision narrowed, as if the edges of the world were folding inward. Then I saw blood. That sight changes something inside a person. Blood has a way of stripping away illusions. Titles vanish. Pride dissolves. You are no longer important or powerful. You are simply alive, and suddenly unsure for how long. People screamed. The joy of the march fractured instantly into panic. I heard someone shout my name. Hands grabbed my shoulders. Others pushed backward, creating space, shouting for help, shouting for soldiers, shouting for God. The noise became distorted, as if I were underwater. Every sound felt far away, delayed. The pain intensified, not like a single stab, but like heat spreading outward. I pressed my hand to my chest without thinking. My fingers came away wet. That was the moment fear arrived, fully formed and undeniable. I thought, this is how it ends. Not in a palace, not in a meeting room, not even in battle. But here, among my people, unprotected, unprepared, in a moment that was meant to celebrate life and unity, there was a strange sadness in that realization, not for myself, but for those around me. I remember thinking of my mother. I remember thinking of unfinished words, of promises made quietly in prayer that might never be fulfilled. The security forces moved quickly once they understood what had happened. They formed a barrier around me, lifting me from the ground. I could feel the urgency in their movements, the tension in their hands. Someone pressed cloth against my chest. Someone else kept repeating my name, telling me to stay awake, to keep breathing. Breathing became work. Each breath felt shallow, incomplete. My chest resisted expansion, as if something inside was holding it closed. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, fast and uneven. That sound frightened me more than the pain. A heart that races feels like a heart trying to escape its own body. As they rushed me away, I caught glimpses of faces, shock, tears, anger, confusion. I wanted to speak, to reassure them, to tell them I was still there. But my voice would not cooperate. Words remained trapped behind my ribs. The vehicle moved fast, too fast. Every turn sent a new wave of pain through me. I stared at the ceiling, counting seconds without knowing why. Somewhere along the way, a calm settled in. Not peace exactly, but acceptance. A quiet thought surfaced, steady and clear. If this is the moment, let me face it honestly. I did not pray aloud. There was no dramatic plea, no bargaining. I simply acknowledged God's presence, the way one acknowledges the presence of the sun even when clouds cover it. I thought of Jesus not as an image or a symbol, but as a man who understood suffering, who understood how suddenly life can turn. By the time we reached the hospital, my strength had begun to fade. The pain dulled, replaced by heaviness. Doctors surrounded me. Lights above, voices overlapping, hands cutting fabric, pressing, examining. I felt myself slipping in and out of awareness, unsure which moments were real and which were imagined. At that point, I truly believed I was standing at the edge of something final. What I did not know yet was that the truth of what had happened was far stranger, quieter, and more humbling than death itself. When I opened my eyes again, the world was quieter. Not silent, but restrained, as if everyone around me was speaking with their voices lowered out of respect for something fragile. The ceiling above me was white, broken by harsh lights that made my vision blur. For a few seconds, I did not know where I was. Pain returned in small, controlled pulses rather than waves. That alone told me something important had changed. A doctor stood near my side. His face was serious but not urgent. That difference mattered. Urgency has a particular expression. It rushes. It tightens the jaw. What I saw instead was concentration mixed with disbelief. He asked me if I could hear him. I nodded. He asked me if I could move my fingers. I did. He asked me to breathe slowly. I tried. Then he said something that took time to reach my understanding. The wound is not deep. At first, I thought he was mistaken. I remembered the force. I remembered the blood. I remembered the weakness spreading through my body like a tide. None of that matched his calm tone. I waited for him to explain further, expecting conditions, warnings, complications. Instead, he looked at another doctor and then back at me. The blade did not reach the heart. It did not puncture any vital organ. I felt confusion before relief. Confusion always comes first when reality contradicts memory. My mind searched for missing information, something that would make the situation logical again. I asked how that was possible. My voice sounded unfamiliar, thinner than usual. The doctor hesitated, then reached carefully toward my chest. What he showed me next changed the way I understand faith, habit, and the quiet ways God moves through ordinary life. He held up my small Bible. The cover was damaged. The pages near the center were torn and compressed. There was a clear indentation where the blade had struck, not deep enough to pass through, deep enough to stop. For a moment, I did not react. My mind refused to assign meaning too quickly. I stared at that small object, so familiar, now altered forever. I had carried it without thought that morning, just as I always did. Slipped it into place out of habit, out of routine, out of quiet discipline. The doctor spoke again, slower this time. It absorbed most of the force. In that moment, something inside me broke open. I had faced danger before. I had stood in tense rooms. I had made decisions that carried weight. But this was different. This was not strategy. This was not calculation. This was not luck in the way people use the word casually. This was precision without spectacle. If I had not carried it that day, the blade would have met my heart directly. If the angle had been slightly different, if the pressure had been slightly stronger, if my steps had been slightly slower or faster, I would not be here speaking to you now. Those thoughts came all at once, heavy and undeniable. I closed my eyes not out of pain but out of recognition that something beyond my control had intervened. Recognition that the line between life and death is thinner than we are comfortable admitting. Recognition that faith is not always rewarded with comfort but sometimes with continuation. I did not feel chosen. I did not feel superior. I felt small, very small. I understood then that God does not always announce his actions with thunder. Sometimes he works through habits, through objects, through routines we consider insignificant. A book carried close to the chest. A decision made months or years earlier without any expectation of consequence. That realization stayed with me long after the doctors finished their work and the room emptied. I kept thinking about how easily I could have dismissed faith as symbolic. How easily I could have left that Bible behind that morning. How easily I could have reduced belief to words spoken only in safe moments. I began to ask myself difficult questions. What does it mean to live with faith rather than speak about it? What does it mean to carry belief not as decoration but as discipline? What does it mean to be spared when so many others are not? These questions did not accuse me. They instructed me. I knew, with a clarity that left no room for doubt, that my survival was not random. It was not something to be used for pride or drama. It was a responsibility, a reminder that if I was still breathing, still thinking, still able to speak, then there was work left unfinished. God had not removed danger from my path. He had met me within it. After the doctors left me alone, the room felt larger than it was. Hospitals have a way of amplifying thought. There is nothing to distract you from yourself. No ceremony, no audience. Just breath, memory, and the quiet ticking of machines that remind you how close you came to silence. I kept looking at that small Bible resting on the table beside my bed. It no longer looked ordinary. Not because it had stopped the blade, but because it revealed something about how faith actually works. Faith is not loud. It is not theatrical. It is not proven in speeches or declarations. Faith lives in repetition, in habits formed long before crisis arrives. I realized then that I had never carried that Bible expecting protection. I did not carry it as armor. I carried it as discipline, as a reminder to pause, to read, to think, to remain accountable to something higher than ambition or fear. That distinction matters. Many people speak of belief, but few build their lives around it in quiet, consistent ways. It is easy to declare faith when circumstances are calm. It is harder to let faith shape daily behavior when no one is watching. Harder to let it guide how you listen, how you decide, how you restrain yourself when power invites excess. That day taught me that faith does not wait for emergencies. It prepares us for them. I thought about how often people treat belief as something to be displayed rather than practiced. A badge, a phrase, a public posture. But real faith lives in the unseen choices. The choice to carry a book instead of leaving it behind. The choice to read instead of scroll. The choice to reflect instead of react. Those choices seem small, almost invisible, until suddenly they are not. I understood that my habit, formed over time without urgency, had placed something between my heart and death, not because I planned it, not because I deserved it, but because discipline creates outcomes we cannot predict. This realization humbled me deeply. It stripped away any illusion that survival is earned. It reminded me that preparation is not always strategic. Sometimes it is spiritual. Sometimes it is simply showing up consistently for the things that matter, even when they appear ordinary. I began to see my life differently after that. Not as something I control, but as something entrusted. Every breath felt borrowed, not in a frightening way, but in a clarifying one. Borrowed time focuses the mind. It forces honesty. Faith, I learned, is not about claiming protection. It is about living in alignment. About choosing practices that anchor you when chaos arrives. About carrying the word not just in your hands, but in your routines. That lesson stayed with me long after my wounds healed. There is a moment after danger passes when fear no longer needs to shout. It sits quietly instead. That was the moment I entered once the doctors confirmed I would live. The pain was real, but manageable. What overwhelmed me was not my body, but my thoughts. I had spent years making decisions that affected thousands, sometimes millions. I had spoken about stability, security, and long-term plans. Yet a single second, a single movement of a stranger's arm had almost erased everything. Not gradually, not symbolically, completely. That truth unsettled me more than the attack itself. We like to believe our lives move forward in straight lines. We imagine time as something generous, something that will wait for us to be ready. But life does not ask permission. It interrupts. It arrives unannounced. It changes direction without explanation. Lying there, I realized how thin the boundary truly is. Not just between safety and danger, but between certainty and illusion. Between what we plan and what actually happens. I thought of the people who had woken up that same morning expecting nothing extraordinary. People who never returned home that night. Not because they lacked faith, not because they lacked goodness, simply because life made a different choice for them. This realization did not make me bitter, it made me attentive. I began to understand that fragility is not a weakness, it is a truth. And truth, when acknowledged, changes how you live. It softens arrogance, it quiets anger, it sharpens gratitude. I stopped asking why it happened and began asking how I would live because it happened. Every human being walks with an invisible clock. None of us can see it, none of us can slow it, but we can decide how we move while it ticks. We can decide whether we rush blindly or walk with awareness, whether we consume time or honor it. That day taught me that postponement is a lie we tell ourselves. Love postponed, forgiveness postponed, reflection postponed, purpose postponed. We act as if tomorrow is promised, when it is only ever possible. From that point forward, I resolved to live with fewer assumptions, to speak more honestly, to listen more carefully, to lead with the understanding that every person I meet carries their own unseen fragility. Power means nothing when a blade is that close to the heart. Life is not fragile because it is weak. Life is fragile because it is precious. After the fear settled and the questions softened, something else began to surface. It was not excitement. It was not triumph. It was recognition. A deep awareness that what had happened to me did not follow the patterns people usually expect when they speak about God. There was no voice from the sky, no vision, no dramatic sign that demanded attention. What saved my life was silent, ordinary, almost invisible. A small book, paper, habit. Weight measured in ounces, not miracles as people imagine them. That is when I understood something many people struggle to accept. God often works quietly. We want God to be loud because loud things feel convincing. We want proof that shakes walls, splits seas, and forces belief. But most of the time, God chooses subtler paths. He moves through routine, through conscience, through the slow shaping of character, through decisions made long before their consequences are revealed. I thought about Jesus and how often his power appeared in ordinary settings. At a table, on a road, in a crowd, through conversation rather than spectacle, through compassion rather than command. He did not force recognition. He invited understanding. What happened to me fit that pattern perfectly. The Bible I carried did not glow. It did not announce itself. It did not repel danger by force. It simply existed where it needed to be at the exact moment it was required. That is how grace often behaves. Present, unassuming, effective. This realization changed how I speak about faith, especially when addressing Muslims, Christians, and leaders alike. Faith is not competition. It is not proof of superiority. It is alignment with something greater than ego. It is attentiveness to meaning beyond control. I do not believe God saved me to elevate me. I believe he spared me to remind me that leadership without humility becomes dangerous, that belief without practice becomes hollow, that life without gratitude becomes blind. God did not remove the knife, he allowed it to reach me. But he placed something in its path long before that moment ever arrived. That is not randomness, that is design expressed through simplicity. And simplicity is easy to miss if we are always searching for noise. As days passed and my strength slowly returned, people began to ask the same question in different ways. Why were you spared? What does it mean? What lesson should others take from this? I did not rush to answer. Some questions need time to mature. If answered too quickly, they turn shallow. What I knew for certain was this. The event was not given to destroy me, but neither was it given to glorify me. It was given to awaken me. Pain has a way of clearing away noise. Once the body begins to heal, the mind starts to sort what truly matters. I realize that moments like this are crossroads. They can harden a person or humble them. They can push someone toward fear or toward responsibility. I chose responsibility. I understood that survival carries obligation. If I was still alive, still able to speak, still able to serve, then my life was not only mine. It belonged partly to the message I had been entrusted to carry. Not a political message, a human one. I began to see the event not as an attack that failed, but as a reminder that succeeded. A reminder that leadership is not protection from danger, a reminder that no position grants exemption from mortality, a reminder that authority without conscience is empty, a reminder that gratitude must be renewed, not assumed. What struck me most was how close everything came to ending without warning. That realization made arrogance impossible. It stripped away any illusion that control belongs to us. It taught me that we are all, at every moment, guests in a fragile space between beginning and end. This understanding changed how I speak to others. To Muslims, I speak with respect for devotion and discipline. To Christians, I speak with humility rather than certainty. To leaders, I speak with caution, reminding them that power does not delay the clock. To the world, I speak as someone who has seen how quickly breath can disappear. The event did not give me answers to everything, but it clarified what questions are worth asking. How do we live knowing tomorrow is uncertain? How do we lead knowing we are temporary? How do we believe without turning belief into pride? These are not questions meant to frighten. They are questions meant to anchor. I came to understand that not all trials are punishments. Some are invitations. Invitations to slow down, to realign, to remember what we already knew but had begun to ignore. If I had died that day, my story would have ended. Because I lived, it continues, and continuation demands meaning. As my body healed, a heavier question settled into me. Not one asked by others, but one that rose quietly from within. If I was spared, then for what purpose? Survival by itself is not meaning. It only becomes meaningful when it is directed. I did not feel invincible after what happened. I felt accountable. There is a dangerous mistake people sometimes make when they survive something extraordinary. They assume they are protected from everything that comes next. I felt the opposite. I felt more exposed, more aware that continuation is not immunity, it is assignment. I understood that my life had been returned to me not as a reward, but as a responsibility. If I had been allowed to walk away untouched, I might have dismissed the moment as coincidence. If I had been gravely injured, I might have focused only on recovery. But surviving in this precise way, so narrowly, left no space for denial. I was meant to speak, not loudly, not dramatically, honestly. I was meant to say that faith is not superstition, it is practice. I was meant to say that power does not equal safety. I was meant to say that God does not always save us by removing danger, but by preparing us before it arrives. Most of all, I was meant to say that belief without humility becomes dangerous, especially in the hands of leaders. I thought about the Sahel, about Africa, about the world, about how many decisions are made each day by people who assume time will always be available to correct mistakes later. How many lives are shaped by pride, haste, and fear. How often leaders forget that they too are temporary. That realization did not weaken my resolve, it sharpened it. I returned to my duties with a quieter spirit, less interested in appearances, less attached to control, more focused on conscience, more attentive to the unseen consequences of words and actions. I began to speak more openly about restraint, about patience, about the need for leaders to carry something heavier than ambition in their hearts. Whether that weight is called faith, accountability, or moral discipline matters less than whether it is carried sincerely. I did not survive to dominate, I survived to testify. Not to impose belief, but to witness to experience. Not to claim holiness, but to acknowledge mercy. Not to frighten, but to awaken. If my life continued, then silence was no longer an option. I speak now not from a place of fear, but from clarity. What happened to me did not make me holier than anyone else. It did not elevate me above humanity. It did the opposite. It brought me closer to it. It reminded me that no matter where we come from, what we believe, or what titles we carry, we all walk the same narrow path between breath and silence. To the Muslims who are listening, I speak with respect. You understand discipline. You understand daily devotion. You understand what it means to order your life around something higher than desire. What I experienced does not stand against your faith. It stands beside the truth that God acts beyond human prediction, and that humility before him is never wasted. To my Christian brothers and sisters, especially those who follow Jesus with sincerity rather than noise, I say this: faith is not proven in declarations, it is proven in habits. In what we carry with us when no one is watching, in how we live when belief costs us comfort rather than granting it. To the leaders of the Sahel and to leaders everywhere, I speak carefully. Power does not delay mortality. Authority does not grant exemption. The moment we forget this, leadership becomes dangerous. Carry something close to your heart that reminds you who you are beneath the title. If you do not, the world will eventually remind you in harsher ways. To those in the United States, the United Kingdom, and across the world who are older, reflective, and searching for meaning beyond speed and spectacle, I speak as one who was forced to slow down. You are not wrong to question the direction of the world. You are not weak for seeking moral ground in uncertain times. The quiet return to conscience is not retreat, it is wisdom. What saved my life was not a weapon, not a wall, not an army. It was a habit, a discipline, a small decision repeated over time. That truth matters because it applies to all of us. We are shaped more by what we do daily than by what we declare publicly. Evil often announces itself loudly, good rarely does. That day in Ouagadougou taught me that events are not always meant to destroy us. Sometimes they are meant to interrupt us, to remind us to become smaller, slower, and more grateful, to turn us back toward what we already knew but had begun to forget. I do not know how much time remains for me, or for any of us, but I know this: if we are still here, it is not accidental. Life continued because there is still something to say, something to repair, something to witness. I wish peace for the world, not as an idea, but as a practice. I wish peace for Africa, not as charity, but as dignity. I wish peace for my own heart, not as comfort, but as alignment. If you have walked far from what you once knew was right, you can return. If you have hardened yourself to survive, you can soften without breaking. If you have confused strength with dominance, you can relearn strength as restraint. The door back to what is good is rarely locked. We are simply distracted. I share this story not to be followed, but to be considered. If it causes you to pause, to reflect, to adjust one small habit in your life, then it has done its work. And if you choose to stay, to listen, to reflect with others who are also searching quietly, then you are welcome to do so. Conversation, after all, is another form of discipline. I will end with this clearly and without embellishment, because truth does not require decoration. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. I speak these words as truth, without exaggeration or performance. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. What I have shared is real, and I stand by it with full conscience. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. These words are true, and I accept their weight. May God guide us away from what destroys and back toward what gives life.